Video games as an art form. Chances are if you are watching this video, you have an opinion in the matter, and I'm as daring to say that you most likely fall into one of three categories. You believe video games should be treated as art, you believe they shouldn't, or perhaps you fall into, ironically, the most vocal group, those of you who don't see why the topic is such a big deal. To be sure, this is not an easy issue to solve, and maybe I'm not the most qualified person to answer it either. This debate has been in the public eye for nearly a decade, since the late film critic Roger Ebert first made his assertion that video games could not be art. Since 2005, games have evolved quite a lot. Graphics have improved, stories have become grander, in many aspects reaching ever closer to that medium Mr. Ebert so revered. So if games weren't art before, this is certainly evidence that they are becoming art now, right? Honestly, I find this facet of the question uninteresting. In my mind, if something is not art in the first place, and it simply grows into an imitation of art, it's still not art. So to really answer this question definitively, I believe we have to go back to gaming's infancy. Before we move there, though, there is another problem that needs to be confronted. No one can seem to agree on what art should be defined as. So I'll say it right here, this is my view of art. And just like with art itself, there is a level of subjectivity in defining it. Still, I tried to be as objective as possible. In my mind, art is a creative, intended form which speaks to an aspect of the human experience. Now, I could have just as easily used a definition culled from a Google search, but none of those seem to be inclusive enough to account for all the mediums already generally accepted as art, such as film, for example. So with that being said, I submit my definition for your consideration. Let's continue. Now, what do we have here? Some horizontal lines? A picture? Perhaps a great minimalist piece depicting a tower, or a lone person lost in an infinite surrounding blackness. Or then again, perhaps it's just Pong. Often considered to be the first commercially successful video game endeavor, though not actually the first video game created, it certainly is the first in mainstream consciousness, which makes it the perfect place to start. That's right. It is in fact my goal to prove that Pong, of all things, is a great piece of artwork. For a great portion of this debate, people have argued that games are a distinct artistic form because they are interactive. The user is an active creator in the artistic development, infusing itself within the piece to create the personal cerebral connection that many demand from any great work of literature or film, for example. While this is an interesting point, I feel that it doesn't make games any different. Since the dawning of art, people have interacted with it. It's not as if looking at the Mona Lisa, everyone feels the same thing. In that the interactivity lies. The subjectivity is relegated primarily to the mind in art. Interactivity with video games is important as well, but pushing a stick or pressing a button to make something happen is not the artistic interactive portion of the game. It is the immersion and fusion of mind and medium where the true interactivity comes in. Does this hold true for Pong? I believe it does, and it may just be the greatest work in that regard. I first submit to you Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, a two-part dance piece which, to many at its first performance, and even to some today, scarcely resembles dance as it's conventionally seen. It's animalistic, it's fierce, it digs down into the raw, primordial urges of man, just as Pong does in a way. Yes, in my eye, video games are most closely related to the visual art of dance. Pong is to me something like a waltz set to no music, on the empty and unconstrained space of imagination. Two great dancers battling each other through skill and proficiency in form. At the top, critics sit waiting and judging. It taps into an emotion that other art is rarely able to. Competition. If you look to nature, much of humanity which lies dormant, hidden from deep within us, is on full display. Animals who exist in packs will often spar against one another to achieve dominance in the group. Take a look at this video of two mountain goats competing. Not only do I think that there is a very apt comparison to be made between this battle and a dance like the Rite of Spring, but it can also be seen as a direct representation of our own human competitive spirit. At one time, when humans too were nomadic, the competitive spirit was more necessary than it is today. A strong leader was required for the survival of the group. Today, competition still exists, but not entirely in the same way, which is why having something to provide that feeling is so important, I think. Yes, something as seemingly innocuous and simplistic as Pong can be used as a gateway to generations of our race long forgot. I think that it's important to understand that just because such emotions aren't at the forefront of human day-to-day life anymore, doesn't mean that they are no longer important to understanding the nature of humanity. In the same way that artwork depicting the plague can still be just as powerful in a plague-free world, competition is still found in the core of the human animal, though it is thankfully gone from ruling our lives. But what if you're playing a computer opponent in Pawn, taking away that authentic human against human competition? What about single-player and or cooperative games in general? What about these games? Are they art? Let's look to dance again. In a solo dance, I see there being that certain unmistakable desperation of a battle taking place. Not against someone else, but against oneself and their place in the world. Self-actualization and realization. The thirst for escaping the tethers of self-imposed limitation. This can all be seen in this kind of dance, and I believe it can be seen in games as well, but through a different lens. One that shows both the dancer and the spectator at the same time. In this way, games may be an ultimate form of artwork. Throughout this video, I've been only using one emotion to justify my entire premise. Do games have more to say beyond this? Well, I believe they can. Some modern plot-based games are definitely making strides in that direction, even though the underlying thing that they provide is the same. But regardless, this one emotion is enough to justify it as art. I like to imagine that all of the world's paintings were the Night Watch, but each one that is made is slightly bigger than the last, and reveals slightly more. I don't think anyone would deny that it's art, it's just very similar art. As of right now anyway, and I do believe that this will change in the future, games as an art form aren't about providing breadth of emotion, but rather depth. Still, there's another, perhaps even more important element of my definition that needs to be addressed: intent. What separates something from being simply wondrous and beautiful, and actual art, is the intent of it being a form. Without inciting too much discussion on the philosophy of the universe itself, when I view something like, for instance, a lone tree on a hill, draped in the snow on a winter's eve, I'm instantly struck by the inherent beauty, but this is not art. No one planned for this scene. Games, on the other hand, even Pawn, have a level of intent. It's dynamic, but not entirely freeform. When you play Pawn, it can be seen that the people who programmed and designed it wanted the ball to react to the paddle in that way. There is art, I believe, to be found in both the gameplay itself, but also in the design philosophy which informed that gameplay. It's about how things interact and how people react to the way that things interact. And when designing a game, this is definitely a foremost thought. The designers are trying to look into the mind of the average person to unearth a universally appealing concept. This sort of leads me into another element that, while not part of my definition, I think is important, as many others do. And that's passion. This is a trait that has become more pervasive as the industry has evolved. It's definitely not the easiest to see in Pawn, though I don't doubt that these pioneers of the industry were putting their all into it. Something like The Legend of Zelda or The Elder Scrolls, however, is just dripping with passion. These are creative works that have a distinct style to them. It's not as if every fantasy game, for example, has the same identifiable vision. You can feel the touch of the creator throughout the work. I'm sure I haven't convinced all of you, or maybe even any of you, so I'll take this in a different direction now. It has been often said that games are not art because nothing in games can ever live up to the great works of literature, film, etc. For those who define art by how well it stacks up to other art, this does not make it easy for them to see games as art. I'm not going to pretend that Pawn has anything to say the way something like Crime and Punishment does, but then again, it doesn't need to. People have made the unfortunate mistake of grouping games into a particular faction of art, trying to compare it to literature and film, when at their base level, they couldn't be more different. Even by making comparisons to dance, I don't think that we should group games with it, because it's incredibly unique. It doesn't fall into any established category. No one is going to compare a Rembrandt to the plot of Citizen Kane, so why do we do the same with video games? At times, we find different parts of what we are looking for in different things. You can't hope to look into one area and always find everything that you're looking for. You can't even do that with something like literature, because even when you find a text that you think says everything, you find another that shows you something beautiful you didn't even know you were looking for. All this being said, the third group is still wondering, why bother at all? This debate has seemingly only created malice between people across the net. How many flame wars have consumed our computers? And very little has been said for the importance of its classification, only that it should or shouldn't. So why bother? Well, for me it comes down to this. If video games are in fact pieces of artwork, we are lucky enough to be living at the time of their conception. The game often cited as the earliest was Tennis for Two, and that was created only a little over 50 years ago. We are living in the time of the first greats. Lovers of musical antiquity will not likely have the chance to hear a new Mozart or Haydn, but we are lucky enough to live in the time of the original Miyamotos and Sakurais. We are so lucky to behold its birth, and if we do not take notice of this now, we miss being a part of it. Let's ensure that these great creators are given their place in the pantheon of artists. What makes games art to you?
I think all games are art, but good art are games that are memorable. Now, just because the game is memorable doesn't make the game good. I find Paper Mario Sticker Stars to be very memorable, but it's not a very good game. Now, an example of bad art would be like Call of Duty, where they take the same game over and over again and just change it just a bit.
Okay, so what makes video games art to me? I'd have to say the main drive behind it would be the immersion factor in video games that's not really present in any other sort of media. Like, you get immersed entirely in the game, in the universe, in the entire story aspect. Everything about it just comes together and flows in a sense where you feel like this could be a real thing. And that's what really makes games art, at least to me, is you get fully immersed in it, and that's what it's all about.
So what makes games art to me is that it blends a lot of the different senses into one. You've got the audio, like audio hearing with like the music and sound effects. Visual, of course, because you kind of have to see to play the game. And then the kinetics and, having to play the game and getting like, just drawn into the game.
Video games are art to me because they are the ideas and passions of a person. It's no different than creating a piece of art. Like, I like to draw, and so I create art that way. A person has an idea for an interactive game, so they put their ideas into that and make their art. Basically, they're the same as I see it.
What game exemplifies games as art the best for you?
The game that exemplifies art to me best is Earthbound. This is because all the phrases like fuzzy pickles and all the characters are just, they stay in your head and you can't forget them.
BioShock 2 is just, in my opinion, it's a very biased opinion. BioShock 2 is literally a perfect game in every aspect of the word. I know that's not what we're talking about, but it kind of works with it. The story is amazing. The environment is amazing, and everything about it believes you to just sell the story of Rapture to you and what's happening in the world. I won't spoil anything, but the events of the story only go to prove that it's an amazing story and something that you would never expect from a shooter genre type deal.
I think I'm going to have to go with Xenoblade with this one, with Xenoblade Chronicles. Because not only does its musical soundtrack and stuff, like, is so amazing in my opinion, just the expansive world and being able to see all these things, like, and you basically go, like, wherever you see you can go to. I think that's just, like, fantastic.
The game I would say exemplifies art the best for me would be Harvest Moon, and it's one of my favorite games. The thing about it is, even though it's kind of what people would assume is dull gameplay to begin with, you're basically farming, and you'd think that'd be boring, but its ability to captivate makes it art to me, even though the graphics aren't exactly top notch like all the 3DS games nowadays.
Minecraft, because you can build, fight, and you can do almost about anything a regular person can do, except there's some things that you can't get in real life.
What game creator currently alive is the most important in your opinion?
Shigesato Itoi, because he brings an experience to us that is like no other. A lot of people say that when Ares dies in Final Fantasy VII, that's really sad, but I don't think that has anything on Mother 3's ending.
Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto, he's the man. To most people, there's not anyone else that stands out as much for video games. I might be wrong, but Shigeru Miyamoto is the one that everyone remembers for creating Donkey Kong, for creating Mario, for creating Zelda. Everything he's created is amazing, and he would be the most important one to the industry for us.
I think I might have to go with Ayanuma on this one, because not only at the moment is he like trying to reinvent a series that many believe has become kind of like treading in its own tracks. He's also make things, I don't know, seem more interesting, like with the new Zelda game, because not only is he trying to take inspiration from like other outside developers, but he's also just like trying things on his own. And
I feel like all game developers are important because without all of them, you wouldn't have the variety of games we have today. Like if you only had one, like Pokemon, I mean, who really wants to play 20 different versions of Pokemon? It would be interesting to see the violent Pokemon games, but it's just not as good as having 20 different games from different developers.
Notch. He makes so many cool games. He made my favorite one, well, my second favorite one, and he made this really weird game, but I still think it's cool, and I like it. It's pretty good games that he makes, and he's the best game creator that I know. When I go on an adventure in Minecraft, it makes me happy, but not sad at all. It's the best feeling in the world for me.